The episode you are about to hear was originally recorded at an EMSTU, epic marathon stream at Theory Underground. Theory Underground is a lecture course, ongoing research, seminar, and book publishing school buy-in for workers with earbuds and professionals who see no future in existing organizations, institutions, and movements. We are all about trying to understand the situation anew. This requires what Marx called the ruthless critique of everything in existence, including the left, Marxism, politics more generally, church, capital, modern schooling. It's all up for question. Whether you are an atheist or devoutly religious, whether you are in a political movement or party, or are independent, whether right or left or neither left nor right, you're welcome here. If you want to get more involved, there's two main ways to do that. To support the public and free content, you can become a patron over at our Patreon. But if you want to get involved, if you want to have special access to some of the course content that is only for members, or if you are interested in being a part of the discussions or being up for the turn, having us actually read your work, then you'll want to become a subscriber. Go to theoryunderground.com and get involved. Thank you. And we're back. Welcome to the stream. Matthew Stanley, how you doing, man?
I'm doing fine. I'm a little burnt after work, but I've been looking forward to this all day.
Awesome. Yeah, I have been doing it all day, and I felt like in the last
hesitant to say I'm the one who's burnt out, you know?
Yeah. In the last like 45 minutes, I think my brain started to clunk down, like it's like, and I hope that didn't make it look like I wasn't vibing with Rachel. I was really digging all of that, but no, it's I need to probably grab some more refreshments and like actually eat something. And I might do that at some point during this conversation in the next like 15 minutes. And so what I'll probably do is do a little bit more setting up the context and saying some stuff than normal, so that I can kind of like step back and it'll be like a self-driving little machine here, you know, between the two of you. But folks, you should already know who Matthew is. We're not going to reintroduce him. He recently had an amazing post on Substack. I already found what he does interesting without having gone super deep into it. And there were a couple articles that I'd really liked before, but this was like, I felt like a really big deal in my world. And that's because when somebody comes along and drops a post and it's like, you're kind of thinking along similar lines, it's like, whoa, look at that. But it's obviously different. You have your own approach to it. And then we've had some conversations since then, both in the comment section of this post, as well as elsewhere, you know, through voice messages and calls and stuff like that. And so basically what the title of this stream currently is Critical Bureaucratic Studies with Matthew Stanley, which is not the title of his post. His post is called Fragments Towards a Sociology from Below. And what I wanted to do was just kind of give you the stage here and let you talk about what brought you to writing this piece, what you've been thinking about that led up to it, and what you've been thinking about since then, kind of like how it has been developing to where now we just say, for now, our working title is Critical Bureaucratic Studies for what we're kind of, where we're overlapping between Theory Underground and Samsara Media.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me on. I've enjoyed our conversations, and it feels great to kind of be writing these pieces and seeing you and Nance both getting excited about them, being like, hey, I see a lot of synergy here. It feels good because I I've tried to keep a lot of political stuff out of my Samsara Diagnostics newsletter. That's on my that's on another platform. That's a different email list. I keep sort of more of my kind of introspective, religious, philosophical, psychoanalytic kind of insights there, but I decided to start putting a bit more of my kind of political sociological analysis on Substack because I've found that it kind of gets more engagement. And that feedback is something that I'm not getting in my private newsletter. So I've kind of some ideas that have just been rattling around. I've decided to just kind of start throwing them out there and see what people do with them. And so I was really excited when you read fragments and thought that it was interesting and that you wanted to engage it. And I can see, even though you were kind of working from a slightly different list of thinkers, there's a lot of overlap. And in fact, I want to learn more about the folks that you see. Like, for instance, Pierre Bourdieu, I know is huge in your thought. I definitely see him as somebody who has a lot to contribute to this way of thinking as well. But to those who haven't read the piece, it's called Fragments Towards the Sociology from Below because I was trying to just figure out what to call this thing that I was seeing, which is this kind of lineage of thinkers who are doing this critique that doesn't really fit on the left or the right. So I'm kind of thinking people along the lines of uh, Michel Foucault, James Burnham, Ivan Illich, Christopher Lasch, James C. Scott, David Graeber, McLuhan's kind of coming in there as well. As I've been doing some more digging, I'm kind of finding more folks in this vein. But you know, Scott and Graeber, they're anarchists. Ivan Illich is this Catholic priest who's also a social critic, and he's sort of maligned for some of his stuff by the left, but he's also like very sympathetic to Marxism and different economic arrangements. And of course, Michel Foucault is this very ambivalent figure on the left. Was kind of turned on by folks like his friends. Um, so I've been trying to kind of identify what is this vein here of folks who are critiquing what I kind of see as the technology of bureaucracy, of how how power functions through institutions today. And so it's not this purely Marxist analysis because it's not looking at capital, it's not looking at economics, it's not looking at um, finances necessarily. What it's looking at is institutions like hospitals and schools and nonprofits and think tanks and government agencies that have been created. You think about things like child protective services, like a lot of these sort of institutions have only come into existence within the past 150 years. There was a huge push for the creation of the profession of the social worker by women in Chicago in like the late 1800s, early 1900s. So there's this new sort of institution that exercises political power in our society, and it's not a corporation, but it also isn't exactly how government used to function. So the way I feel like it was Foucault who really opened my eyes to this because his analysis of the shift in the operation of power from an older model of the right over death to the right to life. And he goes into this in the appendix to the first volume of History of Sexuality. And that's like kind of an urtext for me. Like that's where it really clicked. And so that appendix, he talks about this shift in powers operation where it used to be, you think about the Lord in like say Braveheart, who has the power to come and take your bride, like the primum noctum sort of thing. Like he's this violent force from the outside who can sort of inflict catastrophe and death and violence upon the community sort of with impunity, and that's sort of the right of the Lord. And
But
so
the point being, we literally live on his mercy.
exactly. That there's like the power is what governs kind of the doors of death. Power is what is allowed to inflict pain and torture and up to the point of death upon you, and you can't say anything. And that was how power operated. And there's a lot of, and part of what Michel Foucault is kind of bringing out in History of Sexuality is that all of this sort of hullabaloo about us being repressed is an attempt to pretend that we're still operating under that regime of power, and that sexuality is repressed, so that we have to unleash it, that it's being controlled by the patriarchal father. We have to take away those rules, and we need to unleash these libidinal drives. And he's saying that story is pretending that things haven't changed. In fact, power works differently now. And the way power works differently is that it now operates in this model of the right to life. We've moved from a populace to a population, where now power operates not at the limits of life, where death and pain and suffering are imposed, but it now operates imminently to life. And actually, the goal of power is to guide life towards flourishing. And so now it's actually death is sort of the strange point where power fails, and power is fixated on this point because it wants to understand how it can control this. So you move from a populace who needs to be controlled because they could rise up, because they might get too rowdy, they don't want, they might cheat, they're hiding things from the Lord, to a population who need to be turned into data. They need to be controlled and understood so that they can be helped, so that they can be, it is now the government's job to give you the best possible life, rather than simply being that domain that kind of holds back the outer violence. And part of the reason the Lord could impose violence with impunity is partially because he was also the bulwark against a darker sort of edge of civilization where there was violence waiting. So, but now this new way of conceptualizing people is as kind of this unit that needs to be understood so that it can be optimized for flourishing. Yeah, we could go into a lot. I don't know if you want me to keep talking or not, but that shift, this is what, this shift to the right of life for of how power operates now is kind of what I take Foucault to mean by biopolitics. And I think that once you start to see this tendency in the government and not just the government, but sort of quasi-public entities and institutions that have sprung up to understand and serve these needs, you begin to start seeing the effects in this logic everywhere.
Yeah, this opens up a lot of directions we can take it. And before I start eating and kind of let you guys do whatever you want, I just want to say so we've got all these very sort of subcategories of critical social theory at Theory Underground, like critical media theory and the critique of psychiatry and therapism, and critique of political economy, and critique of libidinal economy, and critical doxology and Timenergy, and and there's another 5 at least in that list. And it's okay, well, this one overlaps really great with the one that I was just calling professional managerial critique. And it's why the idea of university and the PMC courses were the first courses at Theory Underground, even though I knew they're not it's not like doing a Žižek or a Land course. It's not going to get a lot of signups. But at the same time, we wanted to get ourselves off on the right footing. And part of that is okay, so we care about being a part of a community of truth seekers, right? That's basically that's probably the most important part of Jaspers's definition of the idea of the university, as opposed to the actually existing institutions that try to approximate that idea. It's the idea of a community of truth seekers coming from plurality of experiences and fields that bracket certain assumptions and focus on certain parts of reality, but ultimately all of them in there trying to commune with one another and have principled debates and whatnot. It's all because we're trying to understand the universal. We're all trying to understand the whole. Well, that's like this beautiful ideal. Well, isn't that great? In reality, what is it? What is education in the United States? In reality, it's this thing, that we tend to refer to as schooling. And of course, Illich is really good for that. But part of what I was thinking is, this idea of the university in Jaspers and sort of what has become of social change spaces, maybe largely, if not almost entirely, because of their class composition with the PMC. All of that and how that relates to what we're doing here with critical bureaucratic studies is something that I definitely want to hear from just Nance's thoughts, because he's been thinking on this level very deeply for over a year now. For as long as Theory Underground's been around, and we've had conversations kind of revolving around it through all of the EMSTUs that we've done. But before kind of getting into that, I just, one thing I would love to kind of set up as just like a goal of this conversation would be that we, and it doesn't have to be in some special order, touch on the various thinkers that you brought up on your list, that I brought up on my list, that Nance might go, oh, but you guys are missing this guy or whatever. And how do they add to this picture you just painted, this very great, kind of short version of Foucault talking about this power shift? And then I think one of the critical questions, of course, is going to be like, what's the main driver of this shift from death to life, and what is the major driver of that, and then what are other ways that it can be, or that we would want it to be. But I would like to kind of bracket those kind of questions for a different conversation or towards the end of this conversation. And for now, let's just kind of go, what other thinkers really go well with this analysis, but not just like, oh, they're saying the same thing. No, they bring something different to the table, and you can't really think this subject matter without them. And then
Well,
I
I'm
guess
not sure.
I was going to say, and then I guess like, yeah. So what other thinkers, and then why those other thinkers? And so for now, like, let's just take a couple, we take turns talking different thinkers or whatever, and how they kind of add to the picture, but just take one.
So as I've been kind of thinking about how I would teach through this material, one person that came out for me was Giorgio Agamben. So I would include Agamben in kind of like, he's this continuation of Foucault's analysis. So I would include like Homo sacer and his concept of the state of exception, because I think that the role of crisis in modern politics is extremely under-theorized. And I think that's like, in our current context, crisis is kind of the primary story. Like you can like for instance, when you start to notice the ways that using crisis warps the conversation, you can see why it would be tempting to just reflexively constantly have a state of crisis. So I think, every single election is democracy's at stake. I think everybody's got kind of tired of hearing that. Truthfully, I mean, that's true. Every time we get together to vote, democracy could happen or not, that sort of thing. So, but this idea that since democracy is at stake, all these other important things you can't include them in the calculus because there's this crisis. And then you have the climate emergency, which is this emergency that affects everything. And so what happens is this thing gets moved to ultimate status as crisis, and then every other thing that is important to talk about and that should be included in the conversation gets relativized to the point where it can't be discussed. So I think Agamben he's a really important theorist that I would include from the way that he talks about the role that crisis plays in how we think about the role of power and of the state, how it legitimates itself.
I like that. I think I immediately want to jump to like Luhmann or maybe even Norbert Wiener. Because I do see it as like a systems question. Like cuz we're talking about management. Like it's no longer like the populace was disciplined. The population is managed. So I think for me, like just studying the way systems operate, and finding out like, is it at this point where it's already on autopilot? Like, is someone driving the boat, or is the boat kind of driving itself? Because I feel like it is on autopilot. So not only do we have this like nanny state that provides for us all, and we can't, question and advocate for our own interest and stuff like that, because if we do, we're horrible people who want other people to hurt. But like who's in charge? So is this bureaucracy, like in your recent piece was yesterday, I think, or 2 days ago? We were talking about this technology of bureaucracy, like kind of feels like a self-driving car at this point. But I don't know. I don't know. And that's why, so I want to take this like Illich and Foucault, like power and tools and this, and then just really take it to like a cybernetic systems theory direction. Because I think that matters. Like I think we don't even know who to talk to. Like if we all got together and decided we're going to advocate for ourselves, we're going to talk to someone about this. Who is that? Where do we go?
Well, that's the point, is that bureaucracy is designed to where no single individual can be a failure point in the system. So the only thing you can do is tinker with the actual system itself. I would actually push back against the idea that nobody's in charge. I mean, I do agree that we don't know who's in charge of our country right now, but that probably wasn't the point you were making. But more importantly, I actually do think there's reason to think that Kuhn's model of scientific development applies to institutions too, where there's actually like a dominant paradigm can break down. Like there is, I've mentioned crises. There really are crises in systems to where the material and symbolic conditions that allowed that system to keep functioning are not functioning, and they can't support that system anymore. And in moments of crisis, that's usually that's the opportunity where something new can emerge. Usually there's an individual or a group of individuals who propose something new. They have to make an intervention that gets everything back on track, or that that kind of sets a new paradigm that allows people to fit the old system and its failures in, while also improving upon what came before. And so I do think that we have reasons to think that the system can't just continue on perpetually. That there are actually cycles of growth, degrowth, crisis, new things emerging, reorganization, and it's kind of at those points where you can actually intervene and make a change.
Quick little interjection here. What you're listening to was recorded months ago at this point and is just now being released because it's something that happened here. We're proud of it, or it's a very important part of the conversation that we will be referring to as time progresses. But I wanted to take a moment to say there's been some updates since then. 2025 is upon us. If you're listening to this from the future and it's no longer 2025, this is still relevant to you. But for those of you listening at the time of release, it's January. 2025 is the year that we weave the bass braid here at Theory Underground. That means my core concepts and fundamental problems at Theory Underground is being woven with Michael Downes's The Fault Line Theory, Introduction to Land and Introduction to Žižek. These are being woven with Nina Power's Philosophy of Nature and Benjamin Studebaker's Political Theory 101, which is really 12 thinkers. Both of those courses, 12 thinkers, all of these happening over the course of 2025 in 12 months. One lecture per month for each course
making it so that you can attend live or you can binge to keep up, and you'll have plenty of time to do the reading. Everybody, I hope that you will enjoy the rest of this. And yeah, if you want to get involved, become a subscriber. theoryunderground.com/subscribe. Take care.
I would just say that's where we're going to segue after this conversation into the one with Benjamin Studebaker, because, you know, we are the vultures waiting in the wings, watching this, you know, oh yeah, nobody's driving it. Oh yeah, really? You know, and then, you know, as this legitimation crisis builds, people do want something that's more true, more accurate, more good, more beautiful. Of course, that's a very low standard at this point. Like you could have some pretty shitty knockoff of what's good and true and beautiful. It would still be better than what we have, but to the degree that some human beings with an actual grasp on the situation, working together, are able to intervene. Like, I think, yeah, there's a real possibility for like I guess I almost want to say like a new age of legitimacy or something, but that's a corny or clunky way of saying it, because institutions and the state, like, they only work with legitimacy. Like, that, if they don't have that, they just have force, right? Like, and that doesn't work for very long. Human beings go crazy. Human beings get sick of it, and they'll try to stop it. And you can demonize populist resentment all you like. That doesn't change the objective situation, right? Which is what's driving that resentment. And so, you know, like, I guess what I'm saying is, like, there's a lot of opportunity that comes with it. And, like, I guess that's what you're saying, Matthews. Like, it's no, there's real things to be optimistic about, in a sort of sense, if we're looking for those opportunities. The Landian approach is just to be like, oh, everything's cybernetic though, and it always already was, and everything's flat, and so this is just what's happening. Cybernetics is ontology, you know.
Yeah, I want to get into the land conversation you guys had a little bit, but I also don't want to get into the land conversation that you guys had. So, but I do. Let me know if this is an oversimplification of land, but I do think that, like, when cybernetic loops interact with each other, you can get sort of new formations, though. And so it's not clear to me that capitalism is one singular cybernetic loop just continually amplifying itself. Like, what if it's lots of different factors kind of converging, and there's a lot of different ways that it could go depending on how we kind of push it? These are just thoughts that I have. So, but I do, to your point about, like, it's to legitimation. Yeah, I do think that legitimation is kind of at an all-time low, as Rachel was pointing out before. I was on. I mean, she's pointing out that a symptom of legitimation being at an all-time low is the explosion of basically everybody's trying to enlist you to their cult now, and sort of magical thinking, because nothing makes sense. You feel like you can't even trust your own eyes. So, with AI pictures, and the media says one thing, this other person says another. I wasn't there, these sort of things. So, but what I would say is, I do think that our real hope is that the forces that are driving things will run out. Like, universities, for instance, let's just point out universities. Universities can only sustain themselves because of a continual flow of government loans and grant money and endowments. I was looking for that word, endowments, which are basically hedge funds. So they're invested in the stock market. So, like, these are the material conditions that maintain the existence of the university. So if we enter a period of resource depletion, of rapid population loss, of economic crisis and degrowth, there is not going to be a way to literally maintain these institutions. On top of that, the kind of the knowledge and the know-how that is built into these institutions and operationalized will not be able to sustain them, because people won't even have that. They won't have that memory, they won't have the training, they won't be able to pass these things on through institutional policy. So cut me off when you've
No,
heard
so
enough,
it is a sinking ship. A lot of these are sinking ships, and you're saying that that there's a reason to have hope in the fact that these things are unsustainable, right? And I mean, I would just like, rationalization is one of the big drivers of modernity from that sort of Weberian standpoint. And I think, Weber would be important. I think I might have even mentioned him in the comments. Like, he's good for thinking bureaucracy. He's good. I mean, he's maybe like one of the first people to seriously think about bureaucracy. Yes. And rationalization, he is thinking about this in the wake of Marx. And as a person thinking in the wake of Marx, like, he is thinking, so disenchantment, sure. Along with the rationalization of everything comes this disenchantment. But that rationalization is not what probably a lot of you in the audience are thinking. If it's, it's what I was thinking when I first heard it, was like, oh yeah, we're so rational today. That's why we're so disenchanted. No, rationalization also includes the small merchant, or like the guy who borrowed some money from people in his family so that he could go to the countryside and recruit some peasants to work around a new spinning wheel, like the mule or whatever, before it became a factory. That person was being an innovator. That person was finding a new way to do things. That's rationalization, is finding more efficient ways of doing things. And when you have a crisis period in capitalism, and then there's a merger between companies, part of the rationalization process is you're eradicating the redundancies, right? Like, oh, look, we've just merged these two companies. We don't need two people doing the same thing because that one person was barely working in the first place, but we do have to have that person do that thing. We definitely don't need two people doing that thing. Bye one person. And in that kind of a situation, that's rationalization as well. It is more efficient. It is actually wasteful to not rationalize. And so in that point, in that sort of theme, then, what we're doing actually is kind of pioneering some of the ways that a lot of this stuff will get rationalized, which is to say, we've got extremely inefficient systems in place. There are more efficient ways to do these things, which is just to say there are less wasteful ways of doing education. There are people all around the world, and there have been for a long time, who are doing education in ways that are different than how it's being done in these they're hemorrhaging money, these giant institutions. I think that's kind of something to be optimistic about. And so to bring it back to these thinkers and these names on this list, I think Illich is one of the most important for thinking about schooling versus education, and specifically convivial institutions as opposed to manipulative tools. Right. And then, of course, he's a good segue into critical pedagogy through Paulo Freire, who I've got my issues with. And then Andre Gors, who's like really good at bringing Foucault and Illich and sort of like this, the best kernel of Marx all together into a project that surpasses so many of the problems with each of those thinkers when left alone. So Gors and Illich are like really, really, really important for me on this. And you're right that Bourdieu's huge on all of this. Maybe I'll say some stuff about that later. I feel like anyone who's been paying attention to the channel for the last year could probably just, you probably know the ways that Bourdieu matters here. But yeah, can we look at a few more of your thinkers there on this list? Like, for instance, James, when you have James Scott on here, it's like you had already said that part of this new approach, it requires getting to know everyone and what they want, right? And I was just instantly thinking, seeing like a state, legibility, right? Like legibility becomes like this huge. The data is more important than gold, right? So what do you? Yeah, what are you getting from Scott?
Yeah, I think you hit on the concept of legibility. That's huge. I think that I learned a lot about the internal operation of legibility just by working in tech. So my first job was working with a software where we were basically trying to do two things. We were simultaneously trying to build a platform for dispatching dump truck drivers to jobs and have a planning apparatus for planning and executing and analyzing the work that happened. And those two things are connected because you need to be able to know what you're planning to do and what happened in order to know uh, how many trucks to order next time. And so we started out with the trucks because that's the easy part because you can send somebody a text and they'll show up to a job site. But then the question is, how do you know what happened? And so that's when you have to get into the data, and there's a lot of ways to figure out what happened. So there's uh, there's tickets that get generated every single time a dump truck goes underneath the asphalt plants too, basically the silo. It opens up, it drops a certain amount. A bunch of sensors tell you exactly what dropped, exactly the second it dropped, exactly what it was made of. And on the way out, they record which truck it went into and the number on it, who is the driver, what job it's associated with, all of this. And so if you can start feeding that information into your system, you can begin to see instant by instant what is happening at that job site. Now, if you can't do the plant, you have to have the dump truck drivers keying in this information into their apps, for instance. So all of these are mechanisms for making an illegible process legible. Data gives you the eyes to see what's happening. And so when I really got deeply into that problem of trying to understand how to make these processes that are happening visible, and then interpreting what's going on based on what we begin to see. And then what happens is you start to realize, oh, I think this happened here. Let's try this next time to
Right.
avoid that. And now you've got this feedback loop now where the real world is actually being transformed based on you having made an illegible process legible through data. But things happen when you turn an illegible process into a legible process through data, you know? So there's a lot of things that can go wrong with that too, and there's ways that it kind of distorts what you're seeing. So this is kind of just a quick rundown, but like the processes of legibility, you start to see them everywhere. It's wherever you're generating some sort of a record, wherever there's something associated with your name in a system or a piece of paper or some sort of object or um, piece of language that represents you in a certain way, that that is sort of making you legible to where you can be seen and then changed. And the you want to be seen, they want to see you because they want to understand you, because they want to help you. Well, which is change you, good or bad. Um, and so that's that. I think Scott is really great on that. But he's also an anarchist who likes to study how people throw the wrench in these sort of things, like you say the words. Like there are ways of avoiding legibility. Like I know a guy who's um, I know a guy whose wife, she's fourth generation, doesn't have a social security number. You know, like you can literally do that. You just not like at the hospital. I have to sign a piece of paper and send it in. I could just not sign this piece of paper, and my daughter would never have a social security number. Now because it's not even legally mandated for you to have one. So like there's all of these processes that are designed to make you legible, and there's all these kind of little ways you can kind of play around with them. You can fudge them. Like I was just talking with my aunt the other week about how how you're able, like you could do all this weird stuff with like bringing a legal gun into the state, modifying it, uh, buying it, giving it back to the gunsmith to change, and then you can take it to a pawn shop where they hold it for 30 days and they sell it back, and it's all legal. Like all this crazy shit that happens, you can just do this. And so there's Scott and Graeber love
Yeah.
this sort of stuff. They're focused on what are kind of the alternative ways that human beings spontaneously organize themselves in either in the absence of sort of bureaucratic hierarchical structure or in in the shadows or margins of those types of structures.
Yeah. This is why Scott wrote The Art of Not Being Governed, a book that I've always wanted to read. But right, it's about, like there's a rich history of people who have spent their entire lives, not just as individuals, but as societies. Cultures form around, these multi-generational projects to stay out of the reach of imperial China, and they just live in the hills, for instance, right?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about like there's fewer and fewer ways to be illegible today. You know, I think that's like that to me is a problem that kind of keeps me up at night because I do think that people should have a right to be more illegible to society as a whole. Like there's we talk about in the US the right to privacy, for instance. That a lot of people say that that's a right. And yet when push comes to shove, it's not really, because we live in a society. So, but all these sort of things like anytime you are giving visibility of yourself over to somebody else, some sort of a power differential is being established, you know?
Mm.
And I think that we can't live in total illegibility. We have to have some legibility to ourselves, even, that sort of thing. But the we've given so much legibility of ourselves over to bureaucratic institutions that run our world that those feedback loops have started to feed back into our own understanding of ourselves.
Hmm.
And that's kind of the direction that my work on school brain that I brought up and that I'm going to be talking about in my presentation at TUCON is going to be about is this logic of how institutions reproduce themselves. It feeds back into our own subjectivity and how we become legible to ourselves, how we see ourselves, how we experience our own lack, and how we envision ourselves even developing and changing. So that's the big problem for me with structures of legibility is the way that they capture our own self-concept right at its point of origin.
Mm-hmm. Right. And what it means to be a human, having fundamentally changed with the medium and with this sort of PMCification of institutions and institutional solutions to every problem, and the fully institutionalized human, the human who spends their entire life moving from one institution to another, total institutions, as Goffman talks about. And actually, there you go. Goffman goes on the list, actually, because he wrote about total institutions. All of that sort of lays the basis for what we're getting at when we talk about critical bureaucratic studies. And then this is where we got to start closing out. So we'll go to Nance and then Matthew. I guess I'll just say from the list, what who do I really want to mention? I would feel remiss to say One Dimensional Man and Marcuse, even though he's not my favorite thinker, and I think a part of my issue is that everybody's like, oh, you do stuff between Heidegger and Marx, therefore you should like Marcuse. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't like his Freud, and I don't like his New Left assumptions, and I don't like what I see. Everyone who tells me that I should do stuff with him, I get all like, ugh. But in reality, they're right. He is thinking about this. He does deserve to be taken seriously. My revulsion is purely symptomatic of some other bullshit, I'm sure. I think he's worth spending some time with. But I guess Ehrenreich and Gores were the two that I really was focusing on in my response. And I was really stoked to see that you're using McLuhan as well. But I would say, like, kind of between all those thinkers and after Bourdieu, Baudrillard becomes very essential as well. All right, but there you go. Like this is a rich field. Folks, we are talking about a course on critical bureaucratic studies at Theory Underground, maybe like some kind of a seminar. Matthew talks about it in his piece about wanting to do something like that. We started talking about a collab idea because there's so many of these thinkers that I was already wanting to do stuff with next year. And you're one of our subscribers. And like, I want to work with people who are in our cohorts who have great research projects that do help us go deeper into the stuff we're already doing in a sort of sense. But I like how you bring this sort of, it's almost like this sovereign, angle to it. I don't know if you've ever met people like that, but they're like, I'm not a citizen of the United States. I'm a sovereign. I have a friend who does that, and he's managed to live without insurance and, a driver's license and everything for so long. It's a hard life, man. I went to court with him, and he was standing up for himself in front of the judge and trying to explain. The guy's like, is so-and-so here? And he's like, the holder of the title so-and-so is present, but I do not identify. And like the judge was just like, what the hell? And that was basically blew him off and told him, you have to pay the thing or you're going to get a $300 fine and then you're going to go to jail. Bye. And just walked out. Yeah, it was bad. But, you could tell like that kind of thing is on the rise. People look into this stuff. They realize it's socially constructed to some degree. They see that everybody wants to know everything, and they're like, no. And so this is like a sort of natural direction people can go in. And I think there's a big brained version of it, right? There's a way of really tarrying with some of the thinkers who've been thinking about it for a lot longer than us. So thank you. Nance?
So I think the supplement to this, sorry, Nance, give me just a moment. I think the supplement to this, to keep from ending up is in that mindset, is to try to have a robust idea of technology that underlies it, and to see technology as something that does achieve human aims in a useful way, and that there can be like a human inheritance that is also itself open to constant innovation as well. Because like bureaucracy, it is a technology that was developed to solve certain human needs. The problem is that it has over time replaced those needs with its services. And that's something that I also get into in Toucan. But the point is that this whole discussion needs an underlying philosophy of what technology is, how is it valuable, what are its limits and temptations, and how does it inculcate us, and not just in this pure demonization of technology.
That's good.
All this talk about governability and subjectivity and legibility and technology made me think of Catherine Malibu. And I don't know if either of you guys would bring her into this. I suspect she would fit, but this, the play with legibility, governability, subjectivity. I think you're onto something there, man. A lot of things.
Thanks, Nance. I appreciate it.
Cool.
Thank you.
Any closing thoughts?
Lots of thoughts. I'm looking forward to Toucan, and hopefully others are too.
Hell yeah, man. Yeah, very excited to see what you come up with. Everybody, we'll be right back with Benjamin Studebaker right after.
You can support the free and public work at TU by becoming a patron over at Patreon.
But if you would like to get involved and become a member at Theory Underground so that you can listen to special content that is not accessible to anyone else, or if you go up a subscriber level, actually join in the discussions, or at the top level, have us actually read your work, giving constructive feedback, and ultimately paving a way to potentially being a part of what we call the turn, then you'll want to become a subscriber. That's how you will access the ongoing courses and seminars.
We've brought together Benjamin Studebaker's experience in political theory and science and philosophy with my
critical social theory, phenomenology, existentialism, critique of political economy, critical media theory approach, combined with Michael Downes's fault line theory. You know, the CCRU versus Ljubljana School, or Žižek versus Land. And of course, how he brings those against one another and then transcends them through other thinkers like Baudrillard, who he'll be teaching an intro course to in 2025. All of us are teaching stuff in 2025 that rhymes or argues or goes together. And so the best way to accelerate your development getting into theory right now is to just become a subscriber at TU. Just go to the website, click get involved, and I'm gonna look, what I'm about to play for you all is a really special moment from our documentary that we're working on, an interview where Benjamin explains why he's supporting Theory Underground and getting involved as a active member here at the core of the teaching team.
Yeah, so the thing that I notice is that a lot of people criticize the university, they criticize the left, they don't build an alternative institution. They will go, the university sucks, but you know what's great? Substack and Patreon and YouTube, and they'll lean into that. But that is a negation, right? You guys don't do that. You guys are interested in sublating the university within the newly emergent media. Or you could frame it the other way, sublating the newly emergent media within the university, right? And so this, of course, will ultimately lead, if you take it where it goes, to a question of institutions and having actual economic, social role possibilities for theorists. This is the critical crisis, which is that there are still some very bright, very well-educated people, but they are not able to replace themselves. And because most of them have university positions, their level of interest in replacing themselves is to some degree compromised.
Yeah.
They don't have to worry that much about themselves. They don't have that much stake in it because they're already set up. However, because you aren't in the underground, you have some potential of being able to actually create an institution or structure which makes it possible for people to do theory in the future. This is something that, as far as I can tell, only you are doing. The thing about freeing Mikey from wage labor, this idea not only that your channel would free you from the Amazon job, but that this could grow in such a way that it could provide spaces for multiple people, and then those multiple people could interact in the way that they would in a monastery or in a university department. This is the revolutionary idea in terms of raising consciousness and making it possible for us to think in such a way that we could return even to the horizons of the tens and talking about things like Medicare for all in a not stupid, not bullshit way, in a serious way. To get to that point, we need to raise our level of ability to think. We need new intellectuals in our generation that are real intellectuals and not people who are running around scared of what the DSA or their university department thinks of them. You have the potential to actually make a real material intervention into not just knowledge production, but in Bildung, into the making of people. Yeah. This is something that we can do. There's a window right now where I am not in the university, and so I have a real reason to think very seriously about, can we do something else? Because I'm annoyed, myself with the whole process of trying to be in that. And I would like there to be something else, something better. I have all my critiques of it that come in part from being at Cambridge, in part from studying ancient thinkers. We could do something better than it. Not just something that is an imitation or steals some things from it and does the best you can with it, but something that actually is better and that produces the kind of theory that in modernity, how do you make a Hegel? How do you make a Marx? We have to reinvent this. It's no longer possible to do that. We've got to, I think, actually institutionalize in a material way, and this is the sense in which I will uphold the kernel of materialism, actually giving a shit about the structure and what kind of structure is necessary to give rise to a form of life in which this kind of really, really good work can be produced.